Which country produced the best novels in the history of literature, and how might you rank them? That's a difficult question, and the more you attempt to answer it, the more difficult it becomes. I've been reading a lot of Russian literature recently as part of the Hardcore Literature Book Club. Russian literature is tremendous, but the Russians, as you probably know, came late to the novel form. When the novel first started to rise and take off, it was already on its decline. Richardson, Sterne, Defoe, they started the novel form in English, and then by the time they were finished writing, almost everything one could do with a novel was done. Now, of course, there were narratives and there were stories before these writers. You've got Cervantes writing Don Quixote. Of course, you've got Shakespeare and all of his plays. You've got the Bible stories. The thing is, people really take some of these old stories for granted. If you read one of the first novels, which is a really, really long epistolary novel that consists of letters back and forth between characters, Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, ostensibly into our modern sensibilities, this looks really boring. It looks like nothing's happening. And even though we love writers, for example, like Tolstoy, we're reading Tolstoy's Anna Karenina in the book club, we love those writers, but even those writers we take for granted. It's really hard to put ourselves in the shoes of a reader that might have read something like Anna Karenina or something by Dostoyevsky, like Crime and Punishment, for the first time. Firstly, most people couldn't read these books. Unless you were a scholar or you were an aristocrat, very, very privileged, you probably couldn't read these books. And then even at that level, you probably couldn't read that many books. So, getting your hands on a novel by Tolstoy, Dickens, Austen was a thrilling experience. Life otherwise was completely dull. It was boring, it was suffering, it was colourless really, and most people didn't read anything. Most people just had a boring, dull life. So to get one of these novels would have been the most thrilling thing ever. Today, we're surrounded by media. We're inundated with it. It barrages us at all angles. TV shows, really compelling, thrilling dramas, movies at the click of a button. We can stream, we can download, we can join a live concert hall from one end of the world to another by the power of high-speed internet. You're watching me right now, and this would have been impossible only a few years ago. So the English writers kick it off. Sterne, Defoe, Richardson, they kick off the novel form and then they start doing everything they possibly can with it. They start manipulating time, narrative, doing really cool things with character, interior versus exterior. By the time we get to Joyce, Irish, everything that one can do with the novel has essentially been done. Joyce broke the novel. He broke it with Ulysses, and then when he really wanted to drive the nail in the coffin, he broke it with Finnegans Wake. And since Joyce, we've had a ton of books from the literary Potentia. They win Booker Prizes, but they're only doing a sliver of what Joyce did with the novel. And what they're doing lacks his ingenuity, lacks his verve, lacks his power and his life. So anyway, we love Russian literature, we love Russian novels, but when the novel form first kicked off over in Russia, they were initially doing shit that didn't look like novels. It was only when Pushkin, the father of Russian literature, great poet and dramatist, came along and wrote Eugene Onegin, which I'm not pronouncing correctly, and he took the feeling and sentiment and aesthetic sensibilities from the English Romantic movement. We're talking about, poets like Wordsworth, Shelley, Blake, Byron and so on, and then he popularised and ushered in a new movement in literature. And then what happens? Pushkin dies in a duel and he passes on his legacy to a writer called Gogol, who basically writes the first Russian novel called Dead Souls. That's in the 1840s. After that, Tolstoy comes along a bit down the line, and Tolstoy is a master. I personally believe he is hands down the greatest novelist to ever live across any culture and across any time. No wonder Tolstoy resisted Shakespeare. No wonder when we read his aesthetic tract, What is Art, we see why he resisted basically everyone. Beethoven, Wagner, all the great painters, Shakespeare and Cervantes. He resisted everyone because when you're at that level, when you're at the top of your game and you're that much of a genius, you don't want to embrace a lot of people. You don't want to be influenced by Shakespeare. But regardless of Tolstoy's resistance, he self-consciously learnt how to write novels from Austen. Austen set down the template for books like Anna Karenina. He loved Trollope. He said, Anthony Trollope kills me. And he was definitely self-consciously influenced by Flaubert, French, Flaubert's Madame Bovary. There's a lot of overlap thematically and with style, but Tolstoy takes some of the Flaubertian ideas and some of the Flaubertian narrative devices and refines them. And then, of course, you've got Dostoyevsky, and Dostoyevsky is pushing out novels which are imbued with such psychological complexity, which are basically the spiritual and mystical hub of the entire world. Russia at that time, thanks to a handful of great writers, was the mystical hub of the entire world. He's pushing out books like Crime and Punishment, and he's learning how to write novels from writers like Dickens, again, English. Now, what country's literature would Tolstoy rank as the best in the world? Hard to say, but I think he might have ranked French literature as number one. He loved Hugo's Les Misérables. After that, would he have ranked English? I'm not too sure. I don't think there's any chance he would have ranked American literature. At that time, American literature looked like Walt Whitman, a prophetic poet, looked like Emily Dickinson, who was published posthumously, not published in her lifetime, looked like her Melville with Moby Dick and some of his shorter fiction, against biblical power compressed and modernized. Then the wars came, and Theodor Adorno said, after Auschwitz, how can there be poetry? And it looked like, thanks to Joyce and thanks to the wars, that no more novels, no more ingenuity was available to us. The novel was broken, kaput, until the Americans come along. I had a very unfunny professor who said that American literature is an oxymoron. This is not true. American literature is a powerhouse, and it's up there on the world stage. It's up there as great world literature, and American literature, essentially, at least today, is the literature of the English language. And after the wars, it took a little bit of time, but then boom, Americans come in with the postmodernists, and they start breathing new life into the novel form. And now it's their era. For about 100 years or so, Russia was the centre of the world. A bit before then, in terms of literature, English and England was the centre of the world. And then it moves on to America and American literature. Great writers like Thomas Pynchon, Cormac McCarthy, Toni Morrison. We can go on and on and on. We can go to the short story form and talk about Flannery O'Connor. We can go all day long. American literature is definitely some of the best in the world. So you start weighing up all these different countries. You think, well, I like Russian literature, I like English literature, I like American literature, I like French literature. And you just think, I don't know how to rank them. I love them all. And then you come to the problem of expanding out further and considering countries that are beyond the West. And I don't think we can do it. I think the Western literature needs to be separate from Eastern literature, for example. How can one really talk about world literature and talk convincingly and compellingly as an expert on Eastern texts when one's upbringing, one's cultural assumptions and embeddedness are not from over there? I lived in Japan for a while, and all it really did was, by giving me a glimpse as an insider, a little glimpse as an insider, it made me realise just how much was beyond my comprehension. I was not raised Shinto Buddhist. I did not go to a school in a collectivist country, a country with a collectivist mindset. I did not learn to draw pictographs when I was growing up. So when I come to great literature like the tale of the Genji, how on earth can I even begin to possibly comment on it? We barely know our own culture. Today, knowledge of the Bible, which is a central and key text to the Western tradition, is really severely lacking. So when you come to Shakespeare, and people don't appreciate Shakespeare, they think he's unnecessarily difficult, or he's mundane, he's boring, it's because people don't appreciate what he did. He essentially taught everybody how to think and how to talk to themselves, and he did that by responding to literature, high literature, like the King James Bible. So if we can't even comprehend our own culture, how on earth can we comprehend a culture that is completely foreign to us? I'm talking to a Western audience, English speakers, people who speak English as their mother tongue. How on earth can we comprehend the power of the Bhagavad-Gita, Indian text, when we don't know what it's like to be Indian? How can we embark upon South American, Latin literature? Really, it is too difficult to say, and I don't think there are many people in the world who can become an expert on all domains. One can't become an expert on Russian literature, English literature, Indian, Japanese, Chinese. That is a tall order. Now, we can try our best to sample all the different cultures and try to see things through the eyes of other people and appreciate their literature. But when it comes to ranking and trying to be definitive and say, hey, the best the country that produced the best literature is X, Y, and Z. Number 2 is this, number 3 is that. How on earth can anyone say that? That is really, really difficult. I think the British critic Colin Wilson put it best when he said that if a Martian were to crash land on Earth and to read books from authors as diverse as Virginia Woolf, Ernest Hemingway, Leo Tolstoy, Chekhov, they would not believe that these were writers writing about the same world, and they're not. Colin Wilson offered a thought experiment where we can take a ruler, a 12-inch ruler, and depending on how vivid an author's individual specific world that they've created, how vivid that is, we can rank them along the rulers. Dickens created a world unto himself. He's probably around 5 inches in. Jane Austen was more of a describer, as was Trollope, so they might be 3 or 4 inches in, even though they have a lot of vitality. When you get to Hemingway, he's maybe 6-7 inches in. By the time you get to Tolstoy, Goethe, Dostoyevsky, prophetic writers of great power and persuasion, you're talking about 8-9 inches in. It's almost like a bell curve where they go all the way around and then they convince you that what you're reading is truthful representation of reality. But not really. Tolstoy is God in his world and he has created a universe. So keeping that in mind, how can you go beyond the borders that you somewhat understand with that ruler and then start ranking other cultures you've never been to, you've never lived in, you've never been raised in? It's a very, very tall order, but it's a fun adventure to attempt to embark upon. And that's what we're doing when we're reading the great books together. Let me know what your favourite country's literature is. Sometimes when we pick up a book, for example, a Dostoyevsky or a Tolstoy, we end up saying, wow, I love Russian literature. Or when we read Murakami, Kawabata, we say, wow, I love Japanese literature. Why do we think we love X, Y, and Z cultures' literature? I think it's the culture. I think you're getting a little glimpse into a different way of thinking, a different way of life, a different paradigm, a different view of the world, and you're in simpatico with it. I do know that me personally, when I went over to Japan, I felt more in simpatico with the Japanese culture and style of thinking than I did in England. We now have endless opportunities and possibilities open to us to go find our true home, and it might not be in the country we were born and raised in. It might be across the ocean, and we can access that through great literature. So let me know, what country's literature do you like the most? How would you rank the different literatures that you have read so far? And if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll keep making more content. You might also want to check out the Hardcore Literature Book Club, link in the description below.